Let's talk about the 1910 accident in Ignacio. Can you take us through that accident from the beginning to the end?
Okay, well, the date was August 8th, 1910. Well, the first railroad in Marin was the San Rafael and San Quentin, which was formed to bring passengers between San Rafael and San Quentin, where they would get a ferry boat for San Francisco, and that was about 1869. And that started the railroad building era in Marin County. Shortly thereafter, the North Pacific Coast started building a railroad from Sausalito up across Richardson Bay Bridge, over Alto Hill, down in the Corte Madera, and through the Ross Valley, through the San Geronimo Valley, and all the way eventually to Cazadero. Ferry boats connected with the trains, and the ferry boats went to San Francisco. A little later, Donahue began building south from Petaluma through San Rafael and eventually reached Tiburon. Well, I grew up in San Rafael, a couple hundred yards from the railroad tracks, so my whole life was, early life was seeing trains pass by. And one summer, taking time off from college, I decided I needed a job, so I went to work for the railroad, the Northwestern Pacific Railroad at Tiburon. And stayed there for 3 months, went back to college after I got out of college. Didn't have anything to do, so I thought I'd take another summer job. Well, that job lasted some more than 30 years with the Northwestern Pacific and Southern Pacific Railroads. Before the railroads came, there was no practical way to ship produce of the county to the market, and there was no real practical way for people to travel. It was extremely reliable compared to today because there was no automobile traffic to get in the way, and of course the railroads traveled on their own right-of-way. And the times were pretty much guaranteed unless you had fog on the bay, which delayed the ferry boat some, or you had flooding on the tracks. But normally your trip was pretty much guaranteed time-wise. My great-grandfather used to raise hogs, and he would drive them to Bolinas and put them on a ship to San Francisco to the slaughterhouse. San Francisco was a growing city after the gold rush, and so it needed a lot of lumber to rebuild after every fire.
My name's Rita Beale Laherty. My husband was a San Francisco policeman for 31 years. He died 2 years ago. So shortly after the war, about 1948, if you were going to get down to the Bay Area from a place like Marysville, a farming community, you had to go by train. If you started in San Francisco, you went on the ferry across to Oakland, and then you got on the train, and I have done this on several occasions, and it was pretty exciting.
So those that lived in the Ross Valley went to Tamalpais High School, and the railroad ran what they called the school special, which was 5 cars which would leave Manor in the morning, go down to Almonte, back into a spur at Tamalpais High School, and disgorge their students. The school special did have 5 cars. 1 car was for boys only, 1 car was for girls only, and 3 cars were for whatever happened. And the tales of the boys' car are almost hard to believe, but having talked to people who rode in the boys' car, I believe them. It was a pretty rowdy scene. Freshmen were known to get on the train at Fairfax, and by the time they got to Tamalpais High School, they had no pants. And they were thrown out the window, which was a very embarrassing situation. And they had a lot of food fights in the boys' car, where the boys would bring extra fruit for their lunch and pepper each other with it in the car.
The refrigerator cars, which we laughingly, they were reefer cars, and that was code for a marijuana cigarette when we were kids. And so we all laughed about that.
These timetables were issued twice a year by the railroad, and these were what we called employees' timetables, and They were for the government and information of employees only, and they contained the schedule of the trains and different rules. And the reason they were issued twice a year, they would be issued for summer and for the winter, because there were a lot more trains in the summer, because that's how people traveled to resorts and up the Russian River and say up the Valley of the Moon or wherever they would go, they would travel by train. And so we had more trains in the summer and the timetable was bigger. Communication was mainly done by telegraph. Should there be an accident, he would get on the dispatcher's line, which was a separate telegraph line only for the dispatcher, and he would send the signal WK, which meant wreck.
Wreck, wreck, wreck. Polarity and number 6, head on. All a mess.
Have you driven?
You better alert the station manager. Polarity and number 6 had a head on. I gotta clear the line.
These are photos of the 2 locomotives involved. This is number 18 when it was in service on the San Francisco and North Pacific coast at Ukiah, probably about 1901. And it was the locomotive on the Extra West that collided. It was totally destroyed and never rebuilt. The other locomotive shown in later years here, but it's looked about the same here, I'm sure, as it did then, was 20. It was rebuilt and served the railroad for many years thereafter.